Hello and welcome back to the Marketing for Learning podcast. It's Hannah here with you today, and I want to talk to you about a topic that I seem to be discussing quite a bit lately with my clients. And that's about whether we should incentivize learning or not. Of course, we can all admit that we react to incentives as human beings, we do. And there are incentives for almost everything we do in today's day and age. Your coffee shop loyalty card is an incentive to go back to them. You have companies like Vitality Health Insurance that incentivize things like walking. There are incentives everywhere, and we do react to them. But what I want to discuss today is about whether incentivizing learning through the likes of a competition, for example, is actually a help or a hindrance to your learning engagement rates. So in this podcast, I want to talk you through a few things. Firstly, I want to talk about something called the cobra effect. Then I want to talk about why competitions might not be your best bet and some alternatives in learning and development. And then I will talk about when I do think competitions can have a place in our marketing for learning strategies. So let's get stuck in. All right, so first things first, I want to talk about something called the cobra effect. The cobra effect describes the situation where the solution to a problem actually ends up making it worse. And it dates back to colonial India when the British government decided there was too many cobras. It was a public health risk, it was dangerous. So they put a bounty. When people handed in dead cobras, they got a cash reward for it. So what happened? Well, people started farming cobras. They were making more cobras so that they could kill them, hand them in, get the money for it. India was an incredibly poor country at the time. It was entrepreneurial. They were making money out of it. But then the British government realised that it was too much of a costly scheme, and they put an end to it. And then you don't want loads of cobras in your house for no reason, so people let them go. And then there ended up being more cobras than there was in the first place. Now, I won't lie to you and say I've done a lot of research to validate that story, but it teaches us a lesson. So even if it is a parable, it's a lesson. But I think this teaches us a really, really valuable lesson about incentivizing learning. And for us, the solution results in a short-term gain, a bit like it did in the cobra effect. There was less cobras on the streets while the incentive was ongoing. But it leads us to a real long-term failure. No, we don't have more cobras going around our companies, but what we do have is a real lack of engagement. Perhaps even a bigger lack of engagement than we had in the first place. So picture this. You're incentivizing employees at your organisation to get involved with learning. There's a particular learning pathway and you're incentivizing them with a cash bonus that's going to be in their paycheck at the end of the year if they complete all 12 months worth of this learning path. So people do it. They think, oh, that's an easy way to make a bit more money. They get the cash bonus and they're incredibly happy. But then the next year, you're not running that incentive because everybody did it. So it actually ended up costing the business quite a lot of money, paying out all of these bonuses to all of these employees. So what happens in year 2? Well, nobody wants to do learning if they're not getting paid for it. Why should I do it for free? You paid me to do it last year. I don't want to do it for free now. So your engagement rates absolutely plummet. And that's quite an extreme scenario. But consider when there's competition going on, say it's just a leaderboard and it's a team-based competition, okay? So your entire team has to complete X amount of learning or even just one piece of learning and then get on the leaderboard and your score gets you on the leaderboard, your team score. I can imagine, I have experienced one person in the team completing the learning and the rest of them clicking through to the end very, very quickly and getting the answers from that one person. Have we achieved our goal of making more people learn? Have they actually learnt anything? Have they acquired any new skills, knowledge, or otherwise? No. No, they have not. They have bounded together as a team, so if teamwork was the objective, then well done. You can tick that box. But I doubt it was. We're L&D after all. And that's why I really think we need to be careful and actually somewhat reluctant to incentivize learning. Because when we incentivize learning, we do get a short-term peak. We get more people engaged, and then they drop off when the incentive disappears. But not only that, that peak is somewhat artificial. Because are they really learning anything? Or are they just quickly hurrying up through the course so they can say, yay, I've done it, I can get the incentive? Are they leaning over and copying their colleagues' answers because they just want to get the incentive? Probably. We are in the business of learning and development. Although having high numbers on our learning platform dashboard is incredible, that's a lovely thing to see. I know it makes us all feel warm and fuzzy. That is just a vanity metric if nobody is actually learning or developing. So when do incentives and competitions work in learning and development? Well, I think there's two answers to this question. I think it depends on the competition or incentive you're running and when you are running it. So let's start with the first one about the type of incentive or competition. You might run an incentive that picks people at complete random who have completed X amount of learning each year. So say you pick 3 people from across your organisation who have completed, 10 learning pathways in the last year, and they get a reward of some type. That kind of incentive works better than the kind of incentives that's like, if you get to the top of a leaderboard, you will get X, Y, or Z. And that's because some people won't get to the top of the leaderboard, ever. And if you keep running those competitions over and over, that's all about getting to the top of the leaderboard, that incentive quite quickly turns into a deterrent. I don't want to see myself at the bottom of the leaderboard, so I'd rather not bother at all. I'd rather not be on the leaderboard than be down towards the bottom. So unless you are making it completely random, that it's completely fair and it's equal chances for absolutely everybody, regardless of their skill set or their proficiency in a particular topic, to win an award, I can see the competition becoming a deterrent rather than an incentive. But that being said, like I just said, you'd have to run it over and over and over and over again, or we fall into the trap that I mentioned earlier of, well, why should I bother trying if there's no possibility of me winning anything out of this? If I'm not going to get a reward, why should I do this? So I think we need to ensure that we are consistent and completely equal if we are going to have competitions or incentives running attached to learning. We don't want to put people off of getting involved with what we do. So we need to be really, really careful about those people that don't win and the impact it will have for them. And the second time I think we could carefully run some incentives and competitions within our learning engagement strategies is actually at the beginning of the funnel. We've spoken about the age-old funnel on this podcast before. It essentially copies the sales funnel that most businesses use, but applies it to a learning context. We start with awareness, we go into interest, then desire, then action, and then loyalty. In the awareness phase, a competition can work. It can get people to realise what's available. So, for example, if you run a competition when you're launching something completely new, maybe you've got an entirely new learning platform that you need people to log into and explore in some way, incentivizing that can work. But only if what you're offering them when they get there is that compelling that their intrinsic motivations will bring them back again. So you have to be really, really confident in your learning platform, your learning offering, your learning product. You have to be incredibly confident in that. Because in the awareness stage, people don't really realise us. They don't have a prior relationship with us. So it's almost getting their foot through the door. Maybe you can liken it to, I don't know, a shop opening, and it says the first 100 people that come to this new store get a glass of Prosecco and a goodie bag. You might be more inclined to just go in and browse and see what it is. You get your Prosecco, you get your goodie bag, and then actually you realise you quite like the stuff in that store, so you might go back again. It works in those instances. But again, we should be incredibly, incredibly careful about using incentives and competitions for learning. I think another important thing we should consider when we're speaking about incentives and competitions to get people learning is what engagement really means to us. And I always had a definition in my head, and I never questioned that anyone would ever think anything differently until I saw Tom McDowell record his live podcast episode at Learning Network Connect last year. He was interviewing Helen Marshall, and she said engagement. He said, "What do you mean?" And apparently that's a bit of a thing that he does. He challenges people on what engagement really means. And it got me thinking that I think a lot of people in learning are very happy with engagement meaning the number of people on our learning platform. And I think as an industry, we need to push ourselves to do better than that. I think we need to think about genuine, actual engagement that means that people are there, they're willing, they're ready, they're motivated to learn in whatever way that is. So it might not even be on your learning platform. I think somebody could be incredibly engaged with your learning culture and never step foot on your learning platform. There are so many different ways that we can learn away from digital learning. I learned so much on things like TikTok nowadays. I see stuff and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. It piques my interest. I'm ready. I'm engaged. I'm ready to learn. And then I end up going to YouTube to learn more about it, and I Google it. And your audience are doing the same thing. They're out there searching. And I think we need to think of engagement in a much deeper sense of, are our people actually acquiring the skills that we need them to for the future of our business? How are we impacting the business bottom line? That's the big thing. So like I said earlier, it's always great seeing like huge numbers on a learning platform dashboard. And I've been there myself. I love it when I run a campaign and then I see the numbers shoot up. But is that where we should be stopping our interest, or should we be digging a little bit deeper? Let's look in really basic terms first. Did they even complete the learning? Visits only tell you they got there. Did they actually continue through with it? Are they still coming back? Have they actually learned something new? Have they applied anything from it? Is there a performance change? Is there actual skills acquisition? And I know that drifts off into more than engagement, but I often find myself talking to learning professionals about looking at the big picture. And I think that's very important. And I think when we're focusing on incentives and competitions, we're not looking at the big picture. We're looking at small short-term gains that actually could have a detrimental impact going forward. Like I said, if you've incentivized something this year and then you're not going to incentivize it next year, you've removed a lot of the intrinsic motivation in somebody to actually go and do it anyway. Because their mindset will be, well, you paid me last year, or you incentivized me last year. I don't fancy doing it anymore. I think incentives can work if they help build a habit, but I've yet to come across a learning function, being completely honest, that has the budget to incentivize for that long of a period that learning becomes a habit. Often when I talk to learning teams, it's quick, short, snappy incentives that run for perhaps a month, maybe 3 months. I have seen some companies do it for a year, but anything longer than that, it's just out of our realms of reality, isn't it? We don't have the budgets to be running long-term competitions like that. There's a lot to think about when it comes to incentives and competition. So I really just wanted to give you some food for thought today to think about, is it worthwhile? Is it going to help you create that long-term impact that you really want and need? Or is it going to be a deterrent in the long term? Like I said, I'm yet to find a learning function that can invest in an incentive that will last long enough to create the habit of learning, that if that incentive disappeared, people would still keep learning. And again, just put yourself in the shoes of a consumer. If you had a coffee shop card on your phone, for example, my husband's got a Cafe Nero card. He absolutely loves it. They've recently changed how he gets the incentives. I think they cottoned on again that they were losing too much money with it. And now he's not as inclined to go to Cafe Nero. You could be doing the same if you're incentivizing your learning and then you need to stop it for a genuine, valid business reason. So proceed with caution is the message I want you to take away from today's podcast. If you're thinking about incentivizing or making a competition attached to learning, proceed with caution. Thank you so much for joining me for today's episode of the Marketing for Learning podcast. I absolutely love doing these episodes where they're based off a conversation I've had with a learning practitioner. So if there are any topics that you want to discuss, please do reach out to me on LinkedIn. Not going to drag you on the podcast, but if you do want to come on the podcast and talk to me, that would be great. But if not, I just love talking to you guys. And you know what? If you have some competitions that have really worked well for you in L&D, please send them to me. Prove me wrong. I'd love to be proven wrong on this matter. But if not, I will see you on the next episode of the Marketing for Learning podcast. Bye.